If an RPG is going to define a decade, it certainly is going to require that several key elements are checked off in a high-quality manner if it wants a chance at earning that title. First and foremost, the game needs to have a compelling story that immerses the player in a richly detailed world. This includes a well-written narrative, interesting characters with their own unique personalities and backstories, and a sense of depth and history to the game world. Additionally, it should offer a range of choices and consequences, allowing players to shape the story and their character's journey through their actions and decisions. The game must also have a robust leveling and progression system that offers players the chance to develop and customize their characters to fit their preferred playstyle. And there should probably be a variety of side quests, activities, and challenges to keep players engaged and invested in the game world beyond just the main story. But before we get too deep into it, since we're talking about a possible RPG of the decade, we might as well talk about the VPN of the decade, Atlas VPN. Thank you to Atlas VPN for sponsoring this video. If the thought of using a virtual private network intimidates you, well, fear no more, as Atlas VPN's interface is extremely easy to use, and with just a click of a button, literally, your internet use will be protected and encrypted. Atlas VPN will also stop ads and malware and notify you if someone's trying to steal your data. Encrypting and protecting your online traffic nowadays is very important, especially if you're using a network outside of your home. I always activate this VPN if I'm traveling, or maybe I'm using my gym's public Wi-Fi service. With a current deal going on, you can have all of this for just $1.83 a month, plus 3 extra months, and a 30-day money-back guarantee, link below in the video description. Now, there's also more ways you can take advantage of this service. For example, if you're trying to find the best online deals, Atlas VPN allows you to do just that, as you can change the location of your IP address. You can also, of course, use this service to unlock your favorite region or country-locked content from all over the world, whether that's Netflix shows or even region-locked video games. So get the deal while it's hot, as Atlas VPN is only $1.83 a month right now for unlimited devices, plus 3 extra months, and a money-back guarantee. Link is below in the video description. Thank you so much. Back to the video. Let's start off by examining Baldur's Gate 3 in a non-spoiler way, and see how effectively it fulfills the RPG criteria I previously outlined. After this section, I'll get into some more of the out-of-game factors, such as the company behind this game and its potential popularity. Many RPG fans' favorite topic of discussion is a game's classes and character development. Like I mentioned earlier, having a robust leveling and progression system that offers players the agency to develop and customize their characters to fit their preferred playstyles is a requirement in my criteria for a decade-defining RPG. In Baldur's Gate 3, players will be able to choose from a guaranteed 11 different core classes, but I would say likely 12 core classes on official release. In early access, we currently have access to the Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard. The 12th missing class, which is currently not in early access, would be the Monk class, and according to Larian's Q&A from a few years ago, it seems likely that the Monk will be in the game on official release. So likely 12 classes in total, all of which are very different from one another, and we haven't even talked about subclasses yet, which right now in early access there's around 24 subclasses I think, with most classes currently offering 2 or 3 subclass choices per class. The key word here is early access though, as when the game officially launches, this subclass count could go up to as high as, I would say, 37 or so total subclasses. And the point I'm making here is that I think it's fair to say that most players will be able to choose a class of their liking, and then be able to further customize their character or characters down a subclass path that tailors even more to their preferred playstyle. Do you want to play a fighter, but also want to dip into the arcane arts? Well, play as an Eldritch Knight and get access to some wizard spells. Although Baldur's Gate 3 with 5th edition D&D rules and mechanics is certainly not the most complex class system out there, I think it toes a nice line between complexity and simplicity to satisfy most players. I haven't even mentioned multiclassing yet, which according to Larian in the past should be in the game, and this would of course add a whole nother layer to the class system. As for what the max level will be in this game, well, we know that it will be higher than 10 but lower than 20. I'm thinking that the game will probably land us somewhere in the 12 to 14, 15-ish range if I had to guess, although some players will be disappointed that they can't get to level 20, and I can understand that. For myself though, levels 12 to 14, 15-ish when done in a quality manner with plenty of accompanying content per level should be plenty, and it will also leave room for a possible DLC. But don't forget that Baldur's Gate 1 only brought players to around levels 8 to 10-ish, and many would of course consider that game a decade-defining RPG. Choosing your class isn't the only part of character customization though, as we can't leave out the races. Currently in early access, we have access to 9 different races: elf, tiefling, drow, human, githyanki, dwarf, half-elf, halfling, and gnome. And we know for a fact that there will be more races on official launch. Going by the player's handbook, I would say we have at least 2 more races that will be coming, which would be the half-orc and the dragonborn. So likely 11 core races in total, but when you break that down further into the sub-race choices, we're now looking at around 21 plus total choices. Combine that with the 12 core classes and likely 30 to 40 subclasses, it's pretty clear that Larian Studios is not holding back in this department. Now on top of this, I should mention that your choice of race, and also class, but seemingly to a lesser extent, is not just a cosmetic thing, as it will absolutely affect certain in-game situations and dialogues. For example, playing as a drow in this game will affect how some NPCs interact with you. And going even deeper into this, playing as a female drow can further add to the uniqueness of your playthrough. Some of you are aware that most drow live in matriarchal societies in D&D lore. Well, Larian took that into account and added real gameplay elements to represent that. Do you know why many games out there don't really do this? It's because it takes an unbelievable amount of work to program gameplay elements like this, and only a small amount of players will even experience these player choice tailored situations. For example, not everyone's going to play as a female drow. These are real RPG elements, and it's cool that Larian is willing to go above and beyond, because let's be real, most of us would probably still buy this game even if something like your racial choice was only mostly a cosmetic and stat type choice. Choosing your race and class, however, is not truly complete if you can't customize your character's appearance. Although we are very limited in some categories in early access, such as a lack of face choices, I know for a fact that the character customization will have more depth on official release. With that said, there's still some pretty phenomenal customization options going on here already in early access. Just look at the hairstyle and hair color customization. Although we may not be able to finely tune every little tiny bone structure on our character's face, I think we will have plenty of really cool high quality options to allow us to create very unique, interesting looking characters. In a game like this that has so many in-game cinematics involving your personalized character, it seems like Larian's going to be giving us quite a lot in a really high-quality manner. Can't wait to see it in its final form. Moving on to a game having a compelling story that immerses the player in a richly detailed world with depth and history. Baldur's Gate 3's story, in my opinion, is setting us up for one hell of an adventure. And this is coming from someone who has read plenty of D&D books. Shout out to the Legend of Drizzt book series. In BG3, we have these highly intelligent telepathic creatures that look like walking octopuses, and they're called mind flayers. And these mind flayers are implanting tadpoles into the brains of humanoids across the Sword Coast. In a way, it feels like an alien takeover is occurring. Larian has told us that these mind flayers are not actually the main antagonists of the game, as there's also these quasi-gods that are known as the Dead Three, working on some sort of master plan. Then take into account that there's probably 10 other D&D gods that I can think of off the top of my head that will certainly have something to say and probably do about the current situation on the Sword Coast. With all this alien and divine activity occurring, we of course have our character and the companions, who are all forced to very much be involved with this plot, as at the start of the game we are prisoners on a mind flayer ship, and unfortunately, or should I say fortunately for all of you power-hungry players, we seem to have a tadpole squirming around our brain. This parasite is supposed to turn its host into a mind flayer, but I'll leave it at that so I don't give away any Act 1 spoilers. Then you also have plenty of mortals in the game that are chosens of the gods that we will be interacting with. And on top of that, we'll also be heavily involved with the ongoings of regular everyday citizens across the Sword Coast. I'm a huge fan of the setup of this story, and it makes it even more intriguing when you realize that you're going to be part of D&D history. There's not many franchises out there that have as much depth in their lore as Dungeons & Dragons does. What happens in Baldur's Gate 3 is canon material for all of D&D in the Forgotten Realms setting, and it will have a rippling effect on the future of D&D video games, tabletop sessions, and more. The amount of lore and depth behind the world that BG3 takes place in is astronomically huge. Now, I haven't even talked about the original Baldur's Gate games, And although the style of BG3 does greatly differ from the original games, and some fans are upset about that, and understandably so, Larian has told us that there will be significant connections to those original games, even if we can't see them at the moment. We're going to have to wait and see. So in terms of having a compelling story, I'm definitely sold. And as far as having a story with depth and history backing it, I don't know if there's any other more recent RPG out there that can even come close in this department. And this brings us into the topic of companions and interesting characters. Baldur's Gate 3 in Early Access currently offers 5 companions: Starion, Lae'zel, Gale, Shadowheart, and Will. You can have 3 of them join your group at any given time after you've found them in the beginning of the game. Granted, you don't piss them off too much. Or you can play as one of these companions as your main character, when Larian makes that feature available, which will probably be at the latest on official launch. There will also be more companions to choose from and interact with when the game comes out, and 2 of these are confirmed to be from the original Baldur's Gate games, and they are, of course, Jaheira and Minsc and Boo. Each companion does have their own very unique backstory, and these stories are being set up to feel like main quests of their own, which is how a very personal quest should feel. The 5 current companions and your character are all brought together because of this Mind Flayer abduction tadpole problem. This main overarching story doesn't seem to take away from the importance of each companion's individual developing story. So while you work on the main story of the game, you simply won't be able to ignore your companions, as they're going through some really significant stuff that needs to be handled. Or you can ignore them, actually. But your choices and actions have consequences in Baldur's Gate 3. Before moving on, I should also mention that BG3 will have camp followers. These are significant NPCs that will potentially aid you on your journey. From my experience in Early Access, Larian does not seem to be holding back in the development of these characters, and a lot of them are almost just as interesting as the companions themselves. And this brings us into talking about choice and consequence, something that many may actually weigh as the most important aspect of an RPG. In BG3, from what we have experienced in Early Access, I think it's fair to say that for the full game, the chance of your playthrough being exactly the same as someone else's is almost non-existent. Not only does everything pretty much point to multiple endings, the paths that each player takes to reach the end of the game, even if you do experience a similar ending to someone else, there's almost a 0 chance that you'll have the same story to tell. Currently in Early Access, which only gives us access to an incomplete Act 1, you can pretty much try things in any way in any order that you want. Although it's not perfect, as I have kind of broken the game somewhat intentionally a few times, the average player and the path that they take should offer great freedom of choice, with quality content to make their choice not only meaningful, but entertaining and enjoyable. Want to skip the Druid's Grove area completely? Well, it offers probably 10 hours of content on its own, but hey, don't go there if you don't want to. The world will still carry on. Larian has accounted for so many variants of play with handfuls of permutations designed into the game. Although there's no defined morality system in the game, it's very clear that we'll be able to actually be evil in this game, or you can be a strong force for good, or perhaps toe the line between both. NPCs will react to your choices. Kill one and find out, or kill everyone. There's so many events that occur in Early Access that it's very clear that we players will be presented with many impactful choices. What's better than a devil you don't know? A devil you do. There's very little forced linearity in this game, so to say, but at the same time, the overarching problem brings everything together. This freedom of choice also extends into the game's combat. Poison drinks in a camp. Walk through the front gate raging like a barbarian. Tactically set up environmental items to your advantage. Sneak past everyone. Try talking your way through situations with clever words to achieve your goals. Or don't do any of that and figure out something else. On top of the main quests and companion quests, there's also a decent amount of side quests to engage with. Now, I'd imagine that on official release, this number will of course only increase, especially when we get to the city of Baldur's Gate. One of the coolest aspects of these optional discoverable side quests and activities are that with some of them you really have to stumble upon them, or things just have to go a certain way for them to reveal themselves. If you want some extra really cool D&D lore-filled content that also affects gameplay, you should be on the lookout for everything: items, secret entrances, and more. Keeping this spoiler free, some of you probably know about an intriguing, powerful book that can be found in a certain underground area. Well, there's a lot of early access players that never even discovered that quest, or perhaps they started digging their fingers into it, but things just didn't go as planned and they had to turn around. It's really exciting to know that you're playing a game that has so many secrets and alternate paths. It adds a ton to the moment-to-moment gameplay, and it gives a huge boost to BG3's replayability factor. So in terms of checking off the RPG boxes, Larian doesn't seem to be playing around here. But simply checking off the boxes doesn't necessarily equate to something being of quality or even being enjoyable. In your opinion on the story of this game, the companions, how fun the quests are, etc. is of course going to be subjective. Although it does seem like the vast majority of players are enjoying what we've seen so far from early access. What is not subjective here though is the amount of time and resources that Larian is spending on all of these RPG aspects. I can say with confidence that Larian is putting more time and resources into their game on a per asset basis than any CRPG company has ever done in the past. And even when comparing Larian's work to some of the more mainstream action type RPGs, Larian's still pretty high up there. It's pretty crazy that we have a company that is willing to put so much into their game when they know it will never be as popular as a game like The Elder Scrolls. CRPG type games just tend to be a bit more on the hardcore side due to their depth and many times complexity, and because of that they don't appeal to as much of a casual crowd as a game like Skyrim would. Now with all that said, for a title to truly define a decade, I think it must have a rippling effect beyond individual experience. It must achieve a somewhat notable level of popularity, reaching a broad audience, giving it a real opportunity to influence the industry's future development. While niche games may be personally impactful, objectively there's just not a lot of people playing them, so they're of course limited in their impact. It's hard to say that a game is a decade-defining game when only 50,000 people played it. And that's not to bash on smaller niche games, as many of you are aware that some of my personal favorite games of all time certainly fall into that category. But games with widespread popularity, or games that grow to widespread popularity, they have the real opportunity to set new standards and define the future of gaming, and this can actually be for better or worse. If a game becomes popular, or there's a lot of people that bought it, people want to know why. Game development companies want to know why. Publishers, and of course even investors, want to know why. Even games like Diablo Immortal, which may not be well received by most traditional gamers, well, that game still had a major impact on the industry, and it's probably playing a big role in incentivizing more non-mobile gaming companies to start moving their games into the cell phone business, and then begin prioritizing predatory cash grab markets over traditional gaming experiences. Now looking at Baldur's Gate 3, let's figure out if the game is even capable of being an industry shaker. Well, according to several sources, BG3 sold over 1 million copies just a week into early access on Steam alone, which is leaving out GOG and Stadia sales at the time. And that was 2.5 years ago. The full game comes out on August 31st of this year, and I'm assuming that there's been plenty more purchases since then, and there will continue to be more purchases leading up to its official release. And then of course we have the people that purchased the game on the official release date or afterwards. Larian also recently announced that BG3 will be releasing on PlayStation 5, and we know that they're also trying to make that happen for Xbox as well. So you can now add in the console market to the list of potential buyers. So I'd say it's fair to assume that BG3, although it won't be nearly as popular as titles like The Witcher and The Elder Scrolls, its popularity should at the very least be notable in the overall industry, which is really amazing for a game that falls into the CRPG genre style of play. I also think that because of the time and resources that Larian is putting into BG3, I think it gives this game a real opportunity to grow the CRPG genre as a whole. When I say CRPG genre in this video, I'm referring to RPGs that fit into that isometric party-based tactical combat type genre that the computer role-playing games of the past basically created. With BG3, I really feel like it has a chance to bring in players that never thought that they would enjoy a game of this style, and if you're one of those players that's potentially interested in this game but you didn't really play previous games of this style, let me know below in the comments. Many CRPG type games just don't have, or they're very limited in terms of their cutscenes and cinematics. Many of them you have to read hundreds if not thousands of boxes of text. There's usually not a ton of voice acting, animations tend to be kind of poor, the graphics are usually not that great when you compare them to other genres, and all of this combined, from an outsider's perspective looking down on some of these games, they just don't have that appeal to a ton of gamers out there. They don't incite that much excitement to someone that's not familiar with the genre. This is of course not true for many of you on my channel, including myself, as most of that stuff many of us don't really feel like it's of prime importance for an RPG to be good. But what if it was good? When we take a look at Baldur's Gate 3, it has some of the highest quality cinematic scenes that you can find in the entire gaming industry. Every single dialogue in the game has voice acting at a very high quality with some of the biggest names in the industry. For many of the animations, Larian is using real actors with motion capture technology. The graphics of the game itself are, I would say, very good. You can almost objectively, in terms of quality, say that the visuals are probably the best that the CRPG industry has ever seen, and this is how new games should be. They should always be looking to push the envelope, even if this style may not be your personal favorite. All of this is pretty eye-catching to many gamers, and it certainly adds to the marketing. I think it gives Baldur's Gate 3 a real shot of introducing a ton of new fans to the CRPG style of game that would have otherwise overlooked it. As long as the game also checks off the RPG boxes that many of us greatly value much more than visuals and animations, I don't see why this wouldn't be a good thing for everyone. There's one last quick discussion topic that, in my opinion, adds a lot on the scale for a game to potentially be a decade-defining game, and that is the company behind it and how people generally feel about them. Larian Studios is currently loved by what seems to be most. Of course, their previous Divinity series was a big success, which plays a big role in that, but previous success aside, after all of these panel from hells for BG3, most of us probably share the sentiment that Larian seems to be a really passionate company that values and takes great pride in their work. Now, shows are of course shows, which don't necessarily show the real picture of who people are and how a company operates. But when we take a look at Larian's history, you can't find any sexual harassment scandals or crunch time, Larian has ruined my life stories. Also, as someone who was fortunate enough to be able to visit their studio and participate in a panel from hell, I interacted with probably over 50 or so Larian peeps, ranging from interns to the CEO and creative director himself, Sven, and the company gives off a really good vibe. I'm sure that there's some problems, as with any company in the history of companies, but these guys are either really insanely good at hiding things, or they're just simply a good solid company, which in my opinion is much more likely, especially considering that Larian has been around since 1996. On top of this, Larian seems to greatly value community feedback, as changes to Baldur's Gate 3 over the course of early access seem to be in favor of what players truly want. The 5th edition based reaction system, which was somewhat recently implemented, was a huge addition to early access, and before it was implemented, not having it, or not having a true reaction system, should I say, was one of the biggest criticisms from BG3 players that were also D&D players. A lot, if not most, of the huge complaints at the start of early access have now been addressed. This only further adds to people's love for this company, and when a company is truly appreciated and loved by many fans, that can certainly be contagious. So I think if Baldur's Gate 3 turns into the game that most of us are expecting it to, and take into account that many opinions are not just blind speculation anymore, as some of us have over 1,000 hours in early access alone, I do truly feel like it could be a decade-defining RPG that brings new fans into this genre, while also raising the bar of both the CRPG and the general RPG industry. We have a game that checks the RPG boxes, a game that's being made in a very, very high quality manner, a game that should achieve at least a notable industry level of popularity, and it's being created by a company that seems to be very much loved and supported. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you made it all the way to the end, please leave a comment below, as you are part of a group of subscribers that I very much appreciate, as watch time is one of the biggest indicators to the YouTube algorithm of a good video. Also, big shout out to all channel members and patrons. If you'd like to support the channel in ways such as those, there are links below in the video description. And of course, thank you to Atlas VPN for sponsoring this video. More on that below. I'll catch you on the next one.